In this video, we're going to be going over how to use SAM, AWS SAM. I think it's like, what is it? Serverless application model or whatever, um, to create automatically and update automatically many of the resources, the AWS resources that the Tweeter project uses. In particular, these three for now: API gateway, um, Lambda functions, and then DynamoDB tables. So obviously creating all of those, you've got 14 lambdas and 14 endpoints, and eventually we'll have maybe 5 or 6 tables. Um, Creating all of those manually every time you want to change or update anything is obviously quite annoying, and it's also error prone. SAM helps fix that by having one place that defines exactly what all of those resources should look like, and then SAM will make it so and create all of the objects or update them if they already exist, but you've told them to be slightly different. So in order for this to work, you should have already, or at least as of this video, you should have already done two things. One is the video where you created this Tweeter server module and set everything up. You don't necessarily need to have added anything to it yet. The other is you should have followed the instructions in the GitHub for setting up the initial setup of AWS SAM. In particular, that means you should have this layer folder, layer/node.js/node modules. You should also have this samconfig.toml. And then this is the big one, template.yaml. This is the file that tells SAM what all of your resources should look like. Although before getting into that, I will add one quick note here about this node modules thing. Oftentimes, Tweeter shared will show up as like a symlink rather than a real folder. But this needs to be a real folder. So if that's not the case, then nothing that I show you here will work. So, okay, getting started then. SAM build, if I can type properly. Good start, everybody. When you run SAM build for the first time, it's going to create this .aws-sam folder. You're going to want to add that to your git ignore. You should then, even without doing anything else, if you've just used the template YAML straight off of the example one that we've given you, I've just copied this directly in. I haven't changed anything yet. And you run SAM deploy, it should be able to work. I guess while that's running, oh, there we go. It's done. So over here in API gateway, in Lambda, and in DynamoDB, you can see previously they were all empty. But if I refresh, we now have an API. We also have 2 lambdas, and also there's a table as well. What exactly is template.yaml? How does this work? Well, first of all, I'm not sure if you're familiar with YAML files. A YAML file basically serves the same role as, say, a JSON file. What's a better example? Package.json. It's objects which have properties. Those properties can have string values, they can have array values, or they can have other objects which themselves have properties, which are strings, etc. YAML is exactly the same way. So for example, this is an object called resources. It's an object with a property called Tweeter API. Cores is a property whose object has 3 properties, which are each string values. So that's how YAML format works. The way that template.yaml works is this resources object has one big property for each service. So for this API, for example, all of its subproperties define how the API will look and how it will behave, including, crucially, the endpoints. So here we have 2. Let me shrink this so we can see a bit better. Paths is what the label is. There's one. This is the user/get is what we've called it. We can call this whatever you can call this whatever you want. You can call it get user or something, although it would be lowercase. I'm going to leave it at, oops, I'm going to leave it at the default because that's good enough for me. What do you actually need to do in order to create a new endpoint? Well, copy this. Copy, paste. I've now got a new endpoint. Now it's mad at me because user create already exists, so I need to name it something better. In this case, I want to create a follow endpoint. So the URL is going to be /follow. That's the literal URL that will be used to access this endpoint. Set function name. Now what's that talking about? Well, if you look here, this section here, what is this user create function? Well, if you search down here later on in the Lambda section, we were just looking at the API gateway section of the file. This is the AWS Lambda section. There's a Lambda here named user create function. I don't want this follow to access the user create function, so I'm gonna give it a new one. I'm gonna call it the follow function. Now that doesn't exist yet, so I have to make one. So once again, I'm just gonna copy this. So this needs to be follow function. This first one here is sort of like an identifier. By adding follow function to my /follow endpoint, I'm telling Sam, hey, or I'm telling this endpoint, you're connected to the follow function Lambda. So now my endpoint knows that it's connected to this Lambda. With this needs to go both ways. So the Lambda function also needs to know that it's connected to the endpoint. So let me do that. Let me tell you, you are the /follow endpoint. Two other things to do. I've done that. One, I need to name the actual Lambda itself. It doesn't have to be the same as this. I think it probably should be, just because it makes sense to me. But this is the literal name of the Lambda that will show up here. So I'm going to call it follow function. Lastly is this handler. Now I believe you've done something similar in one of the exercises, but I'll give you a quick rundown anyway. This is essentially how you tell the Lambda needs to know what TypeScript code to run. In my case, in my Tweeter server /source, I have this folder called Lambda, which has two subfolders, follow and user. For this handler, for my follow function, I want this to be in Lambda, oops, if I can type properly, Lambda /follow Lambda is where my function will be. And my function is just called handler. So after the dot, I'm just going to put handler. But that's the function that this will run. So I believe that's it. We have our endpoint. We have our Lambda. Let's Sam build and Sam deploy. But this seems to have done successfully. So let's refresh the page and take a look at what happened. Get the new one. Hey, there's our follow endpoint. Functions, refresh. There's the follow function. And then the tables would be updated as well if we'd changed anything there. So that's pretty much all for the API gateway and the Lambdas. For the next bit of the video, we're going to talk about DynamoDB, how to do this with tables. Now, it's okay if you haven't done this yet. Pause the video and come back when you need to use SAM to deploy a table. So, hey, welcome back. It's been a little while. You've now had the DynamoDB exercise. And so I'm going to expect that you have an idea of what I'm talking about when I say words like partition key. So I have here this follow table as an example, but I want to create a new table. As an example, I'm going to use the visits table. So let's do that. First thing, I'm going to name this resource. This is technically not the same thing as the table name. That's actually what this is. If I name this here, This is what your code will use. This is what will show up here in this tables list. For example, that one has follow, and you can see here it's called follow. So there's my visit table. I've named my table. I'm going to call it visit. Now I need to decide what my partition and sort keys will be. For my table, I want my partition key. Let's say most of the time I'm going to be asking I'm going to start with a person. I'm going to say, where has John been to? So my partition key is going to be, say, person name. Right? And I'm going to put this as a comment. This is me planning it out a little bit. My partition key is going to be person name, and then maybe place name is going to be the other one. Let's say I want that to be a sort key, so that it doesn't just give me all the places, it gives them to me in alphabetical order. Maybe that's useful for some reason. And then let's say I have a date as well, like the day that they visited that place. All of the attributes that are going to be keys, either partition keys or sort keys, need to be defined inside this attribute definitions block. So the first one will say person name, and the second one will say place name. Now this attribute type is basically the data type of that attribute. So person name is a string, place name is a string. There's a couple others. N, for example, means number. If you're doing like a timestamp or something, that might be useful. But most of yours will be string. So that's good. That's both of those. I don't need to add date because it's not going to be a key. It's not going to be the partition or the sort key. So I can ignore that. But I haven't said which is which yet. I've just defined those two attributes. So now I need to tell it what's the partition key and what's the sort key. That's where this comes in, this key schema. Hash here means the partition key, and range here means the sort key. And we've added little comments here, hopefully, for you to remember. But hash means the partition key, and that's going to be person name. And then range means the sort key, and that's going to be place name. There we go. Okay, now that's all good. That's all well and good. But if I want to know who are the people who've been to Italy, I can't ask that question because I have to provide a person's name in order to access anything in my database. That's how partition keys work. We can get around that by using an index. Down here, this whole section here is how the index is defined. If I didn't need an index, I could just delete that whole thing, and I would be done. But for me, I do want this index. I do want to be able to go both ways. So I'm going to create an index. What am I going to call it? Well, the table goes from person to place, so this goes from place to person. So I'll call it the place to person index. And just like the table name, the table name is what your code will use to reference this table. The index name is what your code will use to reference this index. Just like before, key schema. We have to tell it what the what the partition and the sort keys are. So instead of person and then place, this is going to be place and then person. And there we go. That's it. I'm done. You'll notice this date property didn't need to go anywhere. We only really care about the partition and sort keys. One other thing I want to mention here is this provisioned throughput. We had these start at 1. That's probably sufficient for you for now, but you might start getting provision limit exceeded errors, in which case you can bump them up to, say, 5. Keep in mind, both the table and the index have their own provision capacities. Once again, SAM build, SAM deploy. I'm not going to do it just because it'll take a while to do. Possible problems that can come up with tables are often things like maybe you're missing a value, maybe if you haven't defined both of them, or if you've put them in the wrong place. These attribute definitions, for example, for my visit table example, I only used person and place, and then my index was just place and person. But maybe instead of place and person, I wanted to sort by date. So I type in a date and it gives me maybe sorted by the person's name. Date is not defined anywhere yet, and so I have to add it all the way up at the top, this attribute definitions list. Date, and then maybe I show that as like a number. So this attribute definitions has to include all of the partition keys and sort keys for both the table and any indexes. If you don't have this, okay, this is something I don't remember if I actually mentioned. If you don't have a sort key, you don't even need it. You can just make it go poof. Similarly for indexes, it can just go away. So yeah, I believe that's everything. Go forth and do cool stuff.